What the hell do you do when you're worth $12 billion, but you can't stop your own goddamn kid from screaming? That's the question pounding in Julian Croft's head, a jackhammer of shame and rage. He's sitting in seat 1A on a non-stop flight to Geneva, the plush leather sticking to his skin, his face a mask of crimson fury and utter humiliation. His 8-month-old son, Leo, is in the middle of a 3-hour, full-throated, ear-splitting meltdown, and every single soul on this plane looks like they're about to form a lynch mob with Julian as the guest of honor. Have you ever been in that spot? Trapped, helpless, with hundreds of eyes burning into you, judging you? Let me know in the comments below, and while you're at it, smash that like button and subscribe, because you are not going to believe the insanity that happens next. Julian had tried everything. Fucking everything. He'd walked the aisles until his legs ached, bouncing Leo with a rhythm that felt more like a panic attack than a soothing motion. He'd offered bottles of designer German formula, which Leo rejected like poison, spraying the milky liquid across Julian's $7,000 Brioni suit. He'd changed diapers in a bathroom the size of a coffin, a claustrophobic hell that left him sweating and fumbling with tabs and wipes. He even tried playing a Brahms lullaby through his noise-canceling headphones, pressing them against Leo's tiny, furious head. Nothing. The screams just got louder, sharper, a relentless sonic assault. The other first-class passengers weren't even hiding their contempt anymore. He could feel their glares, each one a silent indictment. You and your screaming fucking brat are ruining this for everyone. The flight attendants had offered their useless, syrupy suggestions, their plastic smiles barely concealing their own desperation. Even the goddamn pilot had made a snide announcement about ensuring a tranquil environment for all our guests, a little piece of passive-aggressive bullshit aimed directly at Seat 1A. That's when the impossible happened. A kid, couldn't have been older than 17, emerges from the curtain separating the cattle class from the kings. He's a black kid from the Bronx. You could tell by the grit in his eyes and the unapologetic set of his jaw. His clothes are worn but immaculate, his backpack held together with sheer willpower and a few strips of gorilla tape. He walks right up to Julian's seat, moving with a quiet confidence that seems to bend the furious energy in the cabin around him. He doesn't ask permission. He doesn't introduce himself. He just leans in, his gaze fixed on the screaming baby, and gently reaches out. "May I?" he asks, his voice a low, calm rumble that somehow cuts straight through Leo's shrieking. Julian is so far past exhaustion, so deep in his own personal hell, that he doesn't have the energy to question it. A stranger, a teenager from the back of the plane, wants to hold his kid? Fine. Whatever. He just nods, a single defeated gesture, too wrecked to give a damn about appearances or propriety. The second the kid's hands touch Leo, a miracle unfolds. The screaming stops, not fades, not whimpers down. It just stops. A switch is flipped. The sudden, absolute silence is deafening. It crashes down on the cabin, a physical weight, and 200 passengers collectively hold their breath, terrified to move, terrified to break the spell. The teenager holds Leo with an expertise that seems ancient, a knowledge that couldn't possibly belong to a 17-year-old. He applies a gentle, steady pressure to specific points on the baby's back and chest, his thumb rubbing a slow, hypnotic circle, while humming a melody so deep and resonant it feels like it's coming from the earth itself. Leo's eyes, squeezed shut in a tormented grimace for hours, flutter open. They're wide, curious, and for the first time since takeoff, they look calm, peaceful. He stares up at the boy's face, utterly captivated. How did you do that?" Julian whispers, his voice raw, staring at this mysterious kid who had just accomplished what a team of pediatric specialists and a fortune in baby technology couldn't. The kid offers a small, knowing smile. My mom was a NICU nurse. She taught me about harmonic resonance. Certain vibrations can calm a baby's nervous system. Julian's gaze sweeps the cabin. Every single passenger is staring, their expressions transformed from annoyance to pure, unadulterated awe. But as Julian looks back at the young man who just performed this act of quiet magic, he notices something that makes his heart hammer against his ribs. Peeking out from the kid's patched-up backpack is the neck of a violin case, old and scarred, covered in stickers from youth orchestras and citywide competitions. An intelligence burns in the boy's eyes, a profound depth that goes far beyond his years. "Who are you?" Julian asks, his voice thick with a wonder he hasn't felt in years. The teenager looks Julian dead in the eye, his gaze unwavering, mature. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I'm 17. I'm from the Bronx, and I'm on my way to Geneva to audition for the World Youth Philharmonic." Julian feels the ground shift beneath him. The person who just saved his sanity, who soothed his child when he was at his absolute lowest, wasn't some high-priced professional or a fellow member of the global elite. He was a brilliant, gifted teenager from a world away, a kid from one of the toughest boroughs in America. As Marcus continues to hold Leo, who is now gurgling, actually cooing with contentment, Julian has no idea that this chance encounter is about to unravel a story of staggering talent, profound sacrifice, and a fierce determination that will redefine everything he thought he knew about success, and in doing so, change both of their lives forever. Julian Croft, at 45, was the architect of a biotech empire. His company, Ethelred Innovations, was valued at over $12 billion, pioneering gene-editing therapies that were changing the face of modern medicine. He was on his way to Geneva for a keynote address at a global genetics summit, a speech that would solidify a multi-billion-dollar European partnership. Ordinarily, Julian flew alone, his time in the air a hyper-productive bubble of encrypted calls and strategic planning. But this trip was an anomaly. His wife, Eleanor, was back in New York, dealing with a sudden and serious family illness. "I can postpone the summit, Elle," Julian had insisted, watching her pack a frantic bag. "Absolutely not," she'd said, her voice firm, unwavering. "This deal is the culmination of a decade of your work. Take Leo with you. It'll be an adventure. How hard can it be for 5 days?" Famous last words. He'd tried to hire a top-tier travel nanny, the best the city had to offer. But a sudden case of appendicitis had taken her out of commission 12 hours before the flight. With no time to vet a replacement, Julian found himself boarding the Swiss Air flight with an 8-month-old, a diaper bag overflowing with gear he didn't understand, and a schedule packed with meetings that would determine the future of his company. For the first 2 hours, it was a dream. Leo slept in the first-class bassinet, a perfect tiny angel. While Julian finalized the key points of his speech, he'd actually allowed himself to think Eleanor was right. How hard can it be? Then Leo woke up, and all hell broke loose. The screaming began as a confused cry and quickly escalated into a full-blown, rage-filled shriek. Julian's carefully constructed confidence shattered. He tried the bottle Eleanor had packed. Leo thrashed his head back and forth, knocking it from Julian's hand, his cries intensifying. He tried the diaper change in the cramped lavatory, a nightmarish ballet of flailing limbs and his own clumsy, sweaty hands. Leo just screamed louder. He paced the aisle, bouncing and shushing, feeling the burn of judgment from every direction. The flight attendants offered their useless platitudes. "Sometimes they just need a good cry," one offered with a pained smile. "Have you tried the white noise function on the entertainment system?" another suggested, as if the sound of a digital waterfall could quell this tiny demon. Nothing worked. Leo screamed with a primal force, a sound of pure, untempered misery. As the third hour began, The atmosphere in first class turned toxic. In seat 2B, a famously cantankerous hedge fund manager, Bartholomew Finch, was sighing with theatrical loudness, pointedly tapping his Patek Philippe watch. "This is precisely why infants have no place in a premium cabin," Finch grumbled to his companion, loud enough for the entire section to hear. Across the aisle, a young tech influencer, her face a mask of Botoxed disdain, was furiously typing on her phone, no doubt live-tweeting the horror of her ruined flight. "Some people have zero consideration," she announced to her assistant. "If you can't control your spawn, you shouldn't fly commercial." Julian felt a hot flush of shame and anger creep up his neck. These were his people, his peers, the titans of industry, the global elite. He expected better, a modicum of understanding, but their judgment felt like acid, burning away the last of his composure. The worst part was his own crushing inadequacy. He could command a boardroom of sharks, he could decipher complex genomic sequences, he could bend markets to his will, but he couldn't comfort his own child. The realization was a cold, hard knot in his stomach. Every one of Leo's desperate wails felt like a personal accusation, highlighting a profound failure that his billions couldn't fix. He wasn't just panicking about the flight anymore. His mind raced ahead to Geneva. He had 5 days of wall-to-wall meetings, dinners with investors, and the most important speech of his career. How could he possibly manage that with a baby who was clearly miserable and inconsolable? His entire European expansion, the legacy of his life's work, felt like it was about to be sabotaged by an 8-month-old. Meanwhile, 12 rows back, in the dim light of the economy cabin, Marcus Thorne had been listening to Leo's cries with a growing sense of clinical empathy. He was traveling to Geneva on a ticket paid for by bake sales at his church, a car wash organized by his orchestra mates, and the collected spare change of his neighbors. The audition for the World Youth Philharmonic wasn't just an opportunity, it was a lifeline. It was his only shot at a full scholarship to Juilliard, a chance to escape the gravity of his circumstances and reshape his family's future. Marcus lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in the Bronx with his mother, his grandmother, and his 2 younger sisters. His mother, Elena, worked back-to-back shifts as a nurse, a quiet warrior armed with compassion and exhaustion. 2 years ago, his youngest sister, Sophia, was born 3 months premature, a tiny, fragile thing who spent her first 4 months in the NICU. Elena couldn't afford to take much time off, so Marcus had spent countless hours at the hospital, sitting by Sophia's incubator, watching his mother work her quiet magic. He learned to read the monitors, to understand the subtle language of infant distress. He saw his mother use non-medical techniques, the power of her touch, the specific cadence of her voice, the deep, calming hums she would use to regulate a baby's heart rate. "It's about resonance, mijo," she'd explained. "Everything in the universe has a frequency: fear, pain, peace. You just have to find the right frequency to tune them to." He had watched her calm infants that doctors had given up on, his mother's hands and voice achieving what machines and medicine could not. He called it her magic. She called it listening. Listening to Leo's screams, Marcus recognized the specific pitch of overstimulation and deep-seated discomfort. He heard the panicked, shallow breaths between wails. He knew he could probably help, but he also knew the brutal calculus of the world. A black kid in a hoodie walking from economy into the hushed, rarefied air of first class was not a welcome sight. He would be seen as a threat, a problem, a charity case. He had felt the sting of that prejudice 1,000 times in his 17 years. People saw his clothes, his skin, his address, and they stopped seeing him. For 2 hours, he wrestled with himself. He pulled out his sheet music, the well-worn pages of Bach's Chaconne, and tried to lose himself in the familiar patterns, preparing for the audition that held his entire future in its grasp. But Leo's cries were a magnet, pulling his focus, tugging at the empathy his mother had instilled in him. Finally, his compassion won out over his fear. He carefully put his music away, stood up, and started walking toward the front of the plane, ignoring the suspicious glances from the passengers around him. A flight attendant with a strained smile intercepted him at the curtain. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her tone a perfect blend of professional politeness and gatekeeping suspicion. "The baby," Marcus said, his voice quiet but steady. "I think I might be able to help him." The flight attendant's skepticism was palpable. "Are you a relative of the family?" "No, ma'am," Marcus replied, his posture respectful but firm. "But my mother is a neonatal nurse. I've spent a lot of time around distressed infants. I recognize that cry. There are some techniques." Before she could dismiss him, Julian Croft himself appeared in the aisle, his face a haggard portrait of defeat, Leo screaming against his shoulder. "I heard someone say they could help," Julian pleaded, his usual authority stripped away, leaving only the raw desperation of a father at the end of his rope. Marcus took a deep breath. This was the moment. "Sir, my name is Marcus Thorne," he began, his voice cutting through the noise. "I know this is unorthodox, but my little sister was a preemie. I learned some things about calming techniques, about harmonic resonance. I think your son is overstimulated and in distress. The bouncing and the noise are probably making it worse." Julian stared at Marcus, really seeing him for the first time. He saw the sharp intelligence in the kid's eyes, the quiet confidence in his stance, and beneath it all, a genuine, unvarnished empathy for his son. Julian was so far past caring about protocol, he would have accepted help from a talking chimpanzee. "What kind of techniques?" he asked, his voice cracking. "It's about steady pressure and low-frequency sound," Marcus explained, his tone becoming almost clinical. "It helps regulate their parasympathetic nervous system. It's not about distracting them. It's about grounding them." Julian looked around the cabin, at the sea of expectant, judgmental faces, and then he made the decision that would pivot the axis of his world. "Please," he said, his voice breaking as he held Leo out toward Marcus, "if you can help him. Please." What happened next felt like it defied the laws of physics. The moment Leo was in Marcus's arms, the storm began to subside. Marcus didn't rock or bounce him. Instead, he held him securely against his chest, one hand spread firmly across Leo's back, the other supporting his head. Then he began to hum. It wasn't a melody, not really. It was a single, low note, a resonant baritone hum that seemed to vibrate through Marcus's entire frame and into the baby's. It was the sound of a cello, of a Tibetan singing bowl, of the earth turning on its axis. "Babies in distress have a chaotic heart rhythm," Marcus explained in a near whisper. "The constant, steady vibration helps their own rhythm find a pattern to lock onto. It's called entrainment." Leo's screams tapered off into whimpers, the whimpers into hiccups, and the hiccups into a profound, bone-deep silence. The entire cabin was frozen, watching this kid from the Bronx work a miracle. Leo's eyes, red and swollen from crying, blinked open and focused on Marcus's face, his tiny body melting into the boy's embrace. "Where did you learn that?" Julian whispered, completely mesmerized. "My mom," Marcus said, his focus never leaving Leo. "She says every person has a song inside them. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it. Sometimes you have to sing it for them until they remember it for themselves." Julian watched as Leo's breathing deepened, his tiny fists uncurling for the first time in hours. He was asleep. Bartholomew Finch, the cantankerous hedge fund manager, was staring, his mouth slightly agape. "Astonishing," he murmured to his companion, simply astonishing. The tech influencer across the aisle had put down her phone, her expression one of baffled respect. The flight attendants stood by, their faces a mixture of relief and utter disbelief. "How long will this last?" Julian asked, terrified the spell would break. "He should sleep for a while now," Marcus said confidently. "His system was just overloaded. He needed a reboot." As Marcus gently transferred the sleeping baby back into Julian's arms, showing him how to maintain the same steady, secure hold, Julian studied this young man as if he were a newly discovered element. "Marcus, you said you're going to Geneva for an audition?" he asked, his voice low. "Yes, sir. The World Youth Philharmonic. It's a global program for young classical musicians. The winners get a full ride to Juilliard." Julian was floored. This kid wasn't just a baby whisperer. He was a world-class talent. "That's one of the most competitive programs on the planet. You must be an incredible musician." Marcus gave a modest shrug. "I love to solve problems, whether it's a difficult passage in a Bach partita or a crying baby on a plane. To me, they're just different kinds of puzzles." "Tell me your story," Julian urged, gesturing for Marcus to take the empty first-class seat beside him. Marcus hesitated for a second, then sat, looking both out of place and perfectly at home. "There's not much to tell. I started playing on a school violin when I was 6. My teacher, Mr. Dubois, said I had a gift. He gave me private lessons for free for years." Marcus's eyes lit up as he spoke. "My school's music program got cut, so I practiced in the stairwell of my building. I learned everything I could from YouTube videos and old records from the library." "How did you get the money to fly here?" Julian asked, though he was beginning to guess the answer. Marcus's expression grew serious. "My whole neighborhood chipped in. My pastor passed the plate at church. The guys at the barbershop put out a jar. My mom's co-workers donated their overtime pay. They all believe in me." Julian felt a profound sense of awe. Marcus wasn't just carrying his own dreams on this flight. He was carrying the collective hope of an entire community, people who had given from the little they had to launch him toward his future. Have you ever bet everything on one single moment? That one chance that could change your life forever? I want to hear about it. Drop your story in the comments. And don't forget, if you're finding this story as incredible as I am, hit subscribe so you don't miss the conclusion. "What happens if you get in?" Julian asked. "A full scholarship, living stipend." "Everything," Marcus replied, his voice filled with a quiet, steely resolve. "It means I can focus on my music. It means my mom won't have to work double shifts anymore. It means I can come back and build a real music program for the kids in my neighborhood." Julian knew, in that moment, that he was in the presence of something truly extraordinary. Not just raw talent, but a depth of character and a clarity of vision that could, with the right support, change the world. But he also saw the crushing weight on the boy's shoulders. One audition, one performance would decide it all. As Leo continued to sleep, a perfect, peaceful weight in his arms, Julian made a decision that would send ripples through the rest of his life. "Marcus, I have a proposition for you," he said, his CEO brain kicking into high gear. Marcus looked at him, his expression curious but guarded. "What kind of proposition, sir?" "I'm in Geneva for 5 days of the most important meetings of my career. As you've witnessed, I am catastrophically unprepared to care for my son." Julian paused, letting the weight of the statement hang in the air. "I want to hire you, for the next 5 days. Be my son's caregiver. I'll pay you $500 a day, put you up in the suite adjoining mine at the hotel, and arrange for a private car to take you to and from your audition and any practice sessions you need." Marcus's eyes went wide. $500 a day? Sir, that's more than my mom makes in a week." "It's less than what a professional consultant would charge me in London," Julian countered. "And you've already proven you're more effective than any professional I could find." Marcus's mind was spinning. The money would be a lifeline for his family. But the audition was everything. Mr. Croft, I'm grateful for the offer, I truly am. But this audition, my entire life is riding on it. I can't be distracted. Julian smiled, recognizing the unwavering focus of a true prodigy. I understand. The audition is your priority. I would only need you during my meetings and some evening events. The rest of the time is yours to practice and prepare. Julian leaned in, his voice dropping. Marcus, in my world, I meet brilliant people every day. But what you did 3 hours ago, that was something else. You didn't just solve a problem. You saw a human being in distress. 2 of them, actually, and you stepped in. You risked being misunderstood, being rejected, to help a stranger. That kind of character is rarer and frankly more valuable than any stock in my portfolio. Marcus was overwhelmed. His trip to Geneva was supposed to be a simple, terrifying, all-or-nothing mission. Now it was becoming something infinitely more complex. As the plane began its descent, the lights of Geneva sparkling like a carpet of diamonds below, Marcus looked at Leo, sleeping soundly in his father's arms, and he knew his life had already changed in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. This audition might not be the only test he would face this week. The bigger test would be navigating this new, dizzying world of wealth and power that Julian Croft represented, without losing sight of the values and the community that made him who he was. As the plane taxied to the gate at Geneva Airport, Marcus made his decision. "Mr. Croft," he said, his voice clear and steady as passengers began to stir, "I accept your offer. I'll help you with Leo." A wave of profound relief washed over Julian. It was more than just solving his childcare crisis. It was a feeling of excitement, an eagerness to spend more time with this remarkable young man. "Excellent," Julian replied, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "My driver is waiting. We can finalize the details on the way to the hotel." Walking through the airport was a surreal experience. A billionaire CEO holding a sleeping baby, flanked by a 17-year-old from the Bronx. They were an odd, compelling spectacle, attracting stares that were a mixture of curiosity and confusion. The car was a black Maybach, an opulent vessel of leather and polished wood that felt more like a private jet than a car. "The audition is tomorrow afternoon," Marcus said, as they glided through the pristine Swiss streets. "It's a 3-part process, a prepared solo piece, a blind orchestral excerpt, and an interview with the conductors." Julian listened, impressed by Marcus's composure and focus. "What's your solo piece?" he asked. "The Chaconne from Bach's Partita No. 2, Marcus replied. "It's considered one of the most technically and emotionally demanding pieces ever written for solo violin." They arrived at the Four Seasons Hotel de Bergue, a palace of old-world elegance overlooking Lake Geneva. Noah felt as though he had walked through a portal into another reality. The lobby glittered with crystal and gold, the air scented with money and expensive perfume. "Mr. Croft, welcome," the manager greeted them, his smile radiating practiced deference. "Your presidential suite is ready, as is the adjoining room you requested." Julian's suite was a sprawling expanse of rooms larger than Marcus's entire apartment building floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panorama of the lake and the Jet d'Eau. "Your room is right through there," Julian said, gesturing to an interconnecting door. "Privacy, your own bathroom, room service, anything you need." Marcus stepped into his room and felt his breath catch. It was a haven of quiet luxury, with a bed that looked like a cloud and a marble bathroom that gleamed under soft lights. "Mr. Croft, I don't know what to say. Why are you doing all this for me?" Julian was gently placing Leo into a crib the hotel had provided. "Marcus, I've built my career on one skill above all others: pattern recognition. I recognize talent, I recognize character, and I recognize drive. What you demonstrated on that plane wasn't just a fluke. It was a combination of empathy, intelligence, and courage. He paused, his expression turning serious. But there's more to it. You remind me of me. Marcus looked at him, confused. Sir? I wasn't born into this, Julian said, gesturing around the opulent suite. My father was a steelworker in Pittsburgh. My mother was a seamstress. I got out on a scholarship. I fought my way into rooms I wasn't invited into, and I built my company from nothing but an idea and a refusal to fail. This revelation stunned Marcus. He had built a fortress of assumptions around Julian Croft, the billionaire. Now, that fortress was crumbling. The difference, Julian continued, his voice softer now, is that a few key people opened doors for me along the way. They saw something in a hungry kid from the wrong side of the tracks and took a chance. I've always told myself that if I ever had the chance, I'd pay it forward. The next morning, the day of the audition, the air was thick with nervous energy. Julian had a 10 a.m. meeting with a consortium of German investors. Leo usually naps around noon for about 2 hours, Julian explained, over a breakfast of croissants and berries that cost more than Marcus's weekly grocery budget. That should give you a solid block of time to warm up and get centered before you have to leave. Marcus was grateful, but he also found that taking care of Leo was a welcome distraction. The baby's simple, immediate needs grounded him, pulling him out of the spiraling vortex of his own anxiety. He played his violin for Leo, not the ferocious chaconne, but simpler, sweeter melodies. Leo watched, mesmerized, his little hands clapping with delight. The audition was held at the Conservatoire de Musique de Genève, a hallowed hall that had hosted some of history's greatest musicians. As Marcus walked in, clutching his worn violin case, he was surrounded by other young prodigies from every corner of the globe. They were the best of the best, polished and poised, many of them carrying instruments that were worth more than his family's home. The intimidation was a physical force, pressing in on him. But then he remembered Julian's words. You earned your place here. He thought of his mother, his neighborhood, and the impossible weight of their belief in him. He wasn't just playing for himself, he was playing for all of them. When his name was called, he walked onto the stage, the lights hot on his face, the panel of judges a row of shadowy, inscrutable figures in the darkness. He took a breath, raised his violin, and began to play. The first notes of the chaconne filled the hall, a sound of such raw, aching beauty that one of the judges physically flinched. Marcus wasn't just playing the notes, he was telling a story of struggle, of sorrow, of a desperate, defiant hope. He poured the grit of the Bronx, the exhaustion in his mother's eyes, the fierce love of his community, and the quiet miracle in the sky with a crying baby into the music. He played with a maturity and emotional depth that was staggering. He was no longer a 17-year-old kid at an audition. He was a conduit for something ancient and profound. When the final note faded into the vast silence of the auditorium, he stood, breathing heavily, his entire body trembling with the aftershocks of the performance. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, the head judge, a legendary and notoriously stern German conductor, slowly stood up and began to applaud. Marcus returned to the hotel in a daze, unsure of what had just happened. He found Julian on a conference call, pacing the living room of the suite. Julian ended the call abruptly the moment he saw him. "How did it go?" he asked, his eyes searching Marcus's face. I think it went well," Marcus said, his voice distant. "I played the best I've ever played in my life." He didn't know it yet, but Julian had made a call of his own that afternoon. He had called an old friend from his university days, who now sat on the board of the Philharmonic. He hadn't asked for a favor. He had simply said, There is a young violinist auditioning today named Marcus Thorne. I am not asking you to influence the judges, only to ensure they listen with their whole hearts. He is, without exaggeration, a once-in-a-generation talent. That evening, as Marcus fed Leo his dinner, his phone rang. It was an unknown Swiss number. His heart hammered against his ribs as he answered. It was the German conductor. "Mr. Thorne," the man's voice boomed through the phone. "The committee has made a unanimous decision. We would be honored if you would accept the first chair violin position in the World Youth Philharmonic, and Juilliard has followed our recommendation. They are offering you a full 4-year scholarship." Marcus dropped the spoon. Tears welled in his eyes, hot and sudden. He looked across the room at Julian, who was watching him with a knowing smile, holding a sleeping Leo. The journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. A few days later, as they prepared to fly back to New York, their lives were irrevocably altered. Marcus was no longer just a kid from the Bronx with a dream. He was a recognized prodigy with a future paved in gold. Julian was no longer just a ruthless CEO. He was a mentor, a patron, a man who had rediscovered a part of his own humanity 30,000 feet in the air. "You know what's funny?" Marcus said, looking down at Leo, who was happily nestled in his arms. "This all happened because of a screaming baby, a simple act of just trying to help." Julian nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "That's the secret, isn't it? The universe doesn't reward ambition. It rewards compassion. You never know which door will open when all you're trying to do is the right thing." As their plane took off from Geneva, leaving the pristine city behind, Marcus looked out the window and smiled. The kid from the Bronx who did the unthinkable by calming a billionaire's baby had discovered the most unthinkable thing of all: that a single act of kindness could be the most powerful song in the world, a melody that could quiet any storm and open any door. The crying had stopped. The audition was won. And the future stretched out before him, a symphony of infinite possibility he had never dared to imagine. An act of kindness that changed everything. It just goes to show you that the best things in life happen when you least expect them. What did you think of Marcus's and Julian's story? Let me know your thoughts down below. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe for more stories that will absolutely blow your mind.